On the 4th of September, 476 AD, the office of the Roman emperor effectively evaporated. A barbarian general entered the palace and stripped the 16-year-old Romulus Augustus of his imperial insignia. The boy was simply set aside and sent to live in the countryside. By this point, the position he held had become an utter irrelevance. This was the silent conclusion to over 1,000 years of history. At its height, Rome managed nearly 2 million square miles of territory with the most sophisticated professional army the ancient world had ever seen. History often portrays this collapse as a sudden catastrophe, a tidal wave of barbarian hordes smashing through the gates and burning a vibrant civilization to the ground. These tribes encountered a structure already buckling under its own weight. To understand the fall, we have to look past the invaders and examine the internal diseases that left the superpower defenseless long before the first city was sacked. In 117 AD, Rome reached its territorial peak. The borders stretched from Britain to Syria, creating a logistical nightmare. Without modern technology, a message from a frontier general could take weeks to reach the capital, making it impossible to coordinate distant wars. To stop the bleeding, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire in 285 AD, establishing a western and an eastern half. He hoped two leaders could govern more effectively, but this division unintentionally doomed the West. The Eastern Empire inherited the wealthy trade hubs and prosperous provinces, while the western half was left with a primarily agricultural economy and very little liquid wealth. The Western emperors were suddenly responsible for defending the most volatile borders in Europe, but they were forced to do it with only a fraction of the historical budget. The state was sliding toward bankruptcy, just as the threats outside were intensifying. Rome's economy functioned as an expansionist pyramid scheme. It relied on a continuous cycle of conquest to bring in the massive influx of slave labor required to fuel its agriculture and infrastructure. When the empire stopped expanding, the supply of labor dried up. Without new conquests to extract resources from, production slowed and the tax base began to shrink, causing the entire economic engine to stall. This bankruptcy hit the military first. The state could no longer afford to equip or pay the legendary professional legions that had once dominated the Mediterranean. In a desperate attempt to hold the lines, Rome began hiring foreign barbarian mercenaries to fill its ranks. These units, known as foederati, were often former enemies who were given land or pay in exchange for service. These soldiers had no cultural connection to Rome. Their loyalty belonged to their specific commanders and their paychecks, effectively handing the defense of the empire to the very people who stood to profit most from its collapse. While the borders crumbled, the ruling class retreated. Later emperors abandoned the city of Rome entirely, hiding in the fortified northern city of Ravenna. This isolation allowed corrupt aristocrats to focus on hoarding personal wealth, while the central government's authority over its provinces withered away. This authority was further eroded by the rise of Christianity. For centuries, Rome integrated new territories by merging local gods with the state religion, a process that centered on the emperor as a living deity. Monotheism destroyed this tool of social control. The emperors were no longer the sons of gods, but merely men, making it significantly harder to unify a diverse, fracturing population. The breaking point arrived in 376 AD. Huge tribes of Gothic refugees, fleeing the Huns, arrived at the Roman border begging for sanctuary. Roman officials treated the refugees with calculated cruelty. They withheld food until the Goths were so desperate they were trading their own children into slavery just for portions of dog meat. This abuse triggered an explosive retaliation. The Goths rose up in the Gothic War, and at the Battle of Adrianople in 378, they annihilated 2/3 of the Roman army and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens. This defeat was the final evidence that Rome's internal rot had reached the core. The empire's military was shattered, its treasury was empty, and it could no longer contain the fires starting within its own borders. By 410 AD, the humiliation was complete. Alaric and the Visigoths marched into Italy and sacked the city of Rome for 3 days, meeting almost no resistance from the state. In Ravenna, Emperor Honorius reported it fell into a deep panic when told that Roma had perished. He only regained his composure when he realized the messenger meant the city itself, and not his favorite pet chicken, which shared the same name. This moment signaled that the empire was no longer a functioning political entity. The central gravity that held the provinces together had vanished, leaving only a hollow shell for the successor kingdoms to pick apart. The Western administration steadily disintegrated over the 5th century. It was carved into distinct successor kingdoms, the Vandals in North Africa, the Franks in Gaul, and the Visigoths in Hispania, leaving the Roman state as a memory. The eastern half, however, held firm. Known as the Byzantine Empire, it protected the Roman legal system, Greek learning, and imperial wealth for nearly another millennium, until its eventual fall in 1453. Even in the West, the empire survived culturally. Latin provided the foundation for the Romance languages, and Roman Christianity became the dominant religious and political force throughout the medieval era. Rome's physical infrastructure also dictated the future of the continent. The network of roads and aqueducts determined the flow of trade for centuries, and major modern hubs like London grew directly out of the skeletons of Roman outposts. The collapse of Rome demonstrates that a superpower is defined by more than just its borders. When the economic systems fail, the military is outsourced, and leadership loses cultural legitimacy, the fall becomes inevitable. External pressure only finishes what the internal rot started.